Good morning on Sunday, July 24th. Welcome to all ears listening everywhere, including those here on Zoom. I wanted to think about today's discussion a little more focused by thinking about what we know as beings rather than what we think as humans, and really starting to just distinguish it in conversation while in fact it's intimately intertwined, but think of it somewhat different than we typically do by thinking about it solely in the process of thought, and start to actually notice that knowing awareness that we have. When I think I am not where I am, I think I need to be somewhere else. And if the only place I can be is exactly where I am, if all I ever am is where I am, and all we ever are is where we are, then we share something intimately in common that we cannot escape and yet are not condemned to, because it's the freedom of life, possibility, and potential that is allowed in that present state of awareness that we all share. If that is the case, and let's just presume it is, while we can pretend it may or may not be for the sake of not having to get into an argument over it, if we just engage around that idea and start looking at what thinking does, when I start thinking I need to get somewhere to be whole, and I need to get somewhere to be happy, and I need to get somewhere to belong, I'm thinking I'm not in that place. I'm thinking I'm not here now. I'm not where I am. And I would challenge anyone to start noticing that whenever they're having any thought or any experience or any circumstance that's happening, actually happening, not the ones we're thinking about, I'll get to that in a second, they're always happening in the present state. They're always happening where you are. And when you're thinking about what isn't happening, that thinking is only happening exactly where you are, always. It's not somewhere else. There is no other place to ever be. So thinking is something we do as humans to help function in this seeming relative world that we're often struggling in or trying to conquer and dominate and fix and overcome. It's just something we do to help us. If what it's doing is hurting us in an obsessive, addictive sort of way, it's turning our instincts backwards and causing the fear, literally self-causing the fear. The self is causing fear by the idea that who I am is what I think, and all I am is what I think, and wondering then why I feel alone and disconnected and apart from, and all those other sort of anxiety-driven, stress-driven states that I can experience on a daily basis simply by launching in a thought or a direction that isn't true, that isn't accurate. And it isn't that I think the thought I'm thinking about I can't have or shouldn't have, but it's when I begin to believe that it is true and it is real that all of a sudden I enter into that world of delusion and denial and make-believe and wishful thinking and all of those things that are trying to make believe that I have to get somewhere to have something other than what I have, rather than see that if the basis of my thinking is in conflict with everything, because I'm not even conceding that I am where I am, what good is going to come from all that other thinking in any productive way? And it fairly well describes my life when I'm thinking about my thinking and doing in relation to that thinking, to the exclusion of recognizing that I know where I am is exactly where I am and that everything else is with me. When I launch in those directions, it becomes very convoluted and conflicted. And all of a sudden, everything else seems like it's to blame, and all other things become difficult, and life becomes impossible. Not because life is impossible, because life provides all possibilities, but because I am thinking in impossible ways and using that as a basis of all of my other thought and wondering why I'm struggling to get things and have to feel like I need to self-control I have to control myself. I can't seem to dominate this self that I've created. I'm always at odds with it, trying to feel better about it. And feeling better about what's worse is a trap of addiction. So if I'm feeling better temporarily and then get slammed back into the actuality of my experience and feel that I'm worse off when I get slammed back, I think that I'm so committed to my thinking to feel better about what's wrong that when I'm finally facing what's wrong is wrong, I feel that I'm worse rather than see that I'm actually feeling better about what's happening because I'm feeling what's happening accurately. I'm starting to actually concede that the wrong is the thinking I'm doing where I am now. And it isn't because I can't do it and shouldn't do it, can't ever do it again. It's because I certainly can do it. And if I do it and choose to do it, I'm going to create consequences that are conflicted because I'm in conflict. I'm in a conflict with my nature. I'm in a conflict with nature. And again, if the basis of my operating mode is in conflict, I'm going to create and manifest conflict around me to excuse what I'm doing, so that I can feel like it isn't me and I'm condemned by everything else, so I can justify what I'm doing as something I have no choice over. And the lie of addiction is that there is no other choice but to continue doing the wrong thing, thinking that that thing will finally solve the problem I have, when in fact that thing I'm doing is based on the problem, that is based on making the problem, rather than something that would resolve the problem or dissolve the problem. So if we're all here now and we're speaking in those terms and starting to notice that, the conversation changes dramatically as the concession is made that we're already where we are, we're always where we are, there is no other place we have ever been. It isn't that we weren't there when we were delusional, it's that we were delusional when we were there, thinking that delusion was in fact reality, and that's what illusion is. Illusion taken seriously as reality is delusion. It's again a function of thought, it's not a function of reality. So that's a little introduction to center our conversation and to think about it in terms of what's happening between us now, so that there's a little practice about this in the present. So as you leave here or communicate with others, you can also remind yourself that you're already present, you're always present. You don't need to think you're present to be present. And it will start to allow you to see thinking as simply something we do, something we choose to do. The content of our thought we choose. The thinking, maybe we don't choose because brains think. They're constantly analyzing and comparing and contrasting and weighing, and they're doing what they can to analyze our environment. And feeling about how we're thinking about what's happening, if we're misanalyzing what's happening, we should probably be feeling bad about what's happening because of the thinking we're doing as being bad. And it's okay to feel bad. It's not something not to do. It's something to recognize is a guidance system, just like if you keep driving down a dead-end street and going back to the intersection and then trying the dead-end street again, you're probably going to run into a dead-end street. So if you think of it in terms of this repetition, it starts making sense out of this constant mental obsession of thought, thinking of itself, thought thinking about how to not think. When you're thinking about how to not think, you're thinking about thinking. So it constantly feeds into this idea that thinking is our sole source, and it isn't. It is not our sole source. We have an absolute knowing source. We were capable of being fed and taking care of ourselves well before we ever thought or could speak. We knew to cry, we knew to moan, we knew to do what needed to be done to get the attention we needed. That's even just within the context of being an infant. And yet we still cry and moan and try to get the attention we want because we get pitiful about the thinking we're doing and act pitifully because we, in fact, are pitiful about what we're doing in terms of our relation to what's happening, claiming it's the only thing that we can be doing, rather than seeing that the absolute presence of our nature has never been diluted by that thinking. It's never been pushed away. It's never been escaped. It's never been not there. It's only been thought to be not there within the confines of the intoxication of our own thinking. And that's it. And the mental addiction is the source of all compulsions. And I would suggest to anyone out there that is in sobriety or struggling with sobriety, you're not struggling with one compulsion. You've probably got dozens of compulsions that you're involved with. And I would say dozens is a small number because there's probably hundreds of attachments, like little fish hooks that get stuck in things that seem to be hard to get out once they're in. And we start kind of navigating around this mess that we make and think that somehow the navigation is going to somehow get us out of it, while we're in fact putting the rocks in the marina that we keep running into in the boat we're trying to sail around. And it's a preoccupation of thought. It is a sickness. It's a mental sickness. And I would also suggest that mental disorders all fall in line with mental addiction and compulsions. All mental anxiety disorders, all that stuff fall in the same thing. It's a preoccupation of thought. Somebody who is insane doesn't think they're insane. That's what's insane about what they're doing. Somebody who's not insane says, that's insane to be doing that. They have an observatory capacity, which means they're not insane.
Or tries to change it.
Well, changing
Different era.
Changing it maintains it and manages it. So if we're there now, and now is the only place we can be, it's not much we need here. And if our failing has been in telling stories about what's happening as though what's happening shouldn't be happening, it's probably because we're thinking of what's happening as what we're thinking rather than what's actually happening. And interaction with other voices and bodies is one very good way for us to calculate our own well-being by how well we're being with others and how well we're actually hearing them, rather than insisting on them hearing us and feeling offended by not being heard and not being seen and all of those things that are easy claims to make when we think what somebody else needs to do is start thinking as obsessively about us as we do when we think all we are is what we think. It's going to lead to conflicts. And it isn't because those are wrong or bad, it's because they're useless. And what's wrong about them is that they'll never work. They're never going to convince anybody to think the way you do, because the fact that you're doing it is insane to begin with. Why would you even want them to? To have everybody else start thinking like us as though that would put us out of the misery of conflict is to think we have nothing to do with it once again. And to forget that we're at the center of that initiation and that maintenance and cause.
I was floored very quickly this week, and exactly what you're referring to. I had an issue come up at work, and I knew exactly how it was going to play out. I was definite, knew exactly what was going to happen. And then I got on the phone with the person and I spoke to them, and it was exactly not what was going to happen. And I just sat there and I went, yeah, that I spotted it the first second she opened her mouth and said exactly what she said. I was like, wow, that I made it all up. None of what I thought happened was even remotely in the spectrum of how it played out. And I just sat with it. I was like, yeah, you did all that. You spent all that time and energy up until this point because you were so right about how exactly it was going to play out. And then I just let it, I recognized it and moved on. And I was like, okay, so you aren't as good as you think you are with managing your thoughts and the outcomes you perceive that they will end up being.
Well, it's convenient, isn't it? The way we're so sure that everything's exactly the way we think it is, as long as we're thinking to ourselves, where there's no competition with circumstance. All it is fantasy. All it is wishful thinking. And my sense is it's all based on the fear that we're not in control of what's going to happen, because the expectations about what's going to happen is all we think should happen because it's all we're thinking about. And thinking that we'll be proved right by having things happen rather than actually happen the way they happen, and start to notice that everything's always happening the way that it happens. And it's never been according to what I thought it would be. Even if it was close, it never quite added up in every single little thread that I had in my head. And certainly the satisfaction of it happening the way I thought it would happen never came, because it was always somewhat diverse from my own thinking, which rather than reckon with and say, wow, I'm in the face of infinite possibilities all the time. This is incredible. Anything can happen. That's an adventure. Life isn't impossible then. Life becomes all possibility, rather than saying, yeah, only what should happen is what I think should happen. And my expectations were dashed. Yeah, they're dashed by creating them. The dash is in the creation of them.
It was a very quick lesson. Yeah. I was happy that I identified it. I didn't revert and go, this is, bullshit. This is not, I just stopped and went, this is what we talk about.
She's home.
Yeah.
So within the scope of possibility, if this thing you're just describing, MK, is an accurate assessment of what we're all doing in all the various ways we do it, right? All the stories, all the presumptions, all the denial, all the delusion, all that stuff, the illusions, all that stuff. If it's part and parcel of the exact same thing, and we're doing all of that in the same way with different stories, different people, places, and things associated to it, then talking about it collectively would be a very interesting exploration of our capacity to begin to see possibilities in other areas that we never even thought were possible, and start laughing at potential that would normally be a threat because it didn't align with our thinking that's born in fear, because we know it's wrong. How could it possibly be right? If what happens is always right, how could my thoughts about them be right in advance of it happening? And why am I even bothering to think about it in ways that I think it should be? Aren't I just ignoring the moment I'm in and what's happening in that moment by thinking about another period in time that isn't even happening, as though it's all that's happening? So it kind of opens that discussion up. And so what are the greater possibilities amongst humans, even in our narrow conversation with a few bodies on a Sunday morning? If it's true for one, it's true for all. If it's accurate for some, it's accurate for all. And I'm not suggesting all the stories don't have merit and don't, people are attached to them and their life seems to depend on it. But I can guarantee you, your life does not depend on your stories and your ideas in that regard. And the desperation you have over them is an indication of how much at risk you put your actual life trying to maintain those things. The stress that's caused undermines our physical capacity to even function. And so disease is as common in a conversation as the ill mental health is written off as though it's not even happening. It's happening to some people and not us. While it's glaringly, obviously happening at just about everywhere you turn and look. You can hear the conflicts, you can hear the fights, you can see the insanity popping up throughout society, not just here in our country, around the world. People are struggling under the weight of this, the anxiety, the stress, not knowing what to do, thinking the only thing to do is the wrong thing. And everybody's saying, gee, what a surprise. Why would somebody do that? That strain is perpetuated by not talking about honestly what we're doing, who we are, what we're about. It perpetuates lies and narratives about life that aren't true. Cultures are good at that. And it may seem like a big leap over the daily problems we have, but I assure you, as you begin to make these concessions to your thinking, because they're not concessions you can make in terms of your being, they're concessions you'll make in your thinking. You'll start seeing that your thinking is starting to look at things a lot differently and see capability and possibility where you thought there was none, and act in ways that will go well beyond the limits you would have set to confirm the thinking was correct when it was wrong. Just natural. Even in the conversation here, which can get very quiet when we start thinking about actually talking about what's happening rather than the perpetuation of the stories that we're used to telling. So if we're here, here's a question. If we're here, and if everything that's happening, everywhere that anything is happening, and everything that isn't happening, wherever that might be, is happening right now, what's the possibility right now?
Possibility of what?
Anything.
Pretty high.
What's the possibility of possibility right now?
Anything's possible.
Very good.
There you go.
But that's not really
Endless.
true. As I said it, I realized it's not really true, though.
It is true, though, Anthony.
Is it possible that not everybody has to be in one place here?
Okay, but now what you're going to do is take possibility and come up with something that isn't possible rather than just begin to consider what's possible.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to cram every person on earth into your ears. Okay, so that's impossible. And why even use that as a adjunct to possibility if we aren't hell-bent in a way on trying to come up with reasons to avoid possibility and continue to maintain impossibility?
You just said something about the ears, and it made me think, because then it allows you to continue your limited thoughts and connecting rational, oh, I figured that out. That's actually a lie.
Yeah.
So then I can continue to be like, see, these guys are full of it.
Well, the rationale of a lie is that someday it will be true if it's maintained long enough, and yet it's never true in the moment, so it can't ever be true. And to your issue, Anthony, what's impossible is doing anything at any other time than now. So if a lie is only true in the future, if I effort enough, what I'm doing right now is the lie. What I'm doing right now is maintaining stress under the imagined idea that someday something that isn't true will be true. And now separate out from that, just because something happened, that hasn't happened, like Orville and Wilbur flew the first time. Humans flew, right? The fact that it hadn't happened didn't make it impossible. It just seemed impossible to people who hadn't considered it was possible. That's all. So possibility is still possible, even when the thing hasn't been done. But what can't be possible is something that's impossible. So if you begin conceding the most basic, elementary ideas to thinking, you'll start seeing how quickly thinking will loop around to come up with rationalizations and justifications to continue to maintain the idea that what's impossible is possible, which is I'm going to turn a lie into truth. If I just keep this tack going long enough, hard enough, and I suffer the strains I'm creating and the anxiety I'm creating and the sense of lack that I'm creating and the less than I'm feeling, if I suffer all those things, I will finally be a martyr great enough to have earned the benefit I'm going to get someday. You know what the promise of addiction is? Nothing that it promises. It is a broken promise.
Well, it's interesting.
If you do more, you'll get better, when in fact, the more you do, you're getting worse. It's a lie.
This makes a lot of sense when you talk about it in terms of individual action or inaction based on possibilities and thought, coupled with, as you said, our potentially hundreds of addictions or mental hooks.
Yeah.
But when you describe it in the philosophical or generic terms, that allows people like Anthony and others to talk about, well, this, what do you mean everything is possible? I think that when we look at it in the context of my individual actions, feelings, inactions, thoughts that limit or make for difficulty in my existence from moment to moment, then it starts having a power and an impact as compared to philosophically trying to understand what's possible and impossible.
Well, but think of it. I wouldn't consider it philosophical to consider what's impossible and what's possible when it's very, very similar to math, and 1 + 1 is 2. It isn't philosophical to consider that. It's philosophical to start considering how it isn't that. So
okay, so the truth is, okay, so let me maybe articulate it differently and see if this enhances the discussion. I am not here to try to understand how many derivations one gets to find out the actual root of pi. That doesn't interest me. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to understand, or hopefully be a more helpful, better, productive person in society, as well as a person that's comfortable, positive within their own skin, and not detrimental to my personal existence based on my mental obsessions. So when I look at the issues, if we talk about drugs, alcohol, food, sex, gambling, whatever, or I look at the inactions because of my fear or not my worries about what tomorrow may bring, it helps to start what you've said is anything is possible. But as soon as you start having to look at the impossibility of it, now I'm in this kind of mental debate of what can and can't happen, when all maybe I really need to do is get off my ass and go to the gym, or maybe get up and go to work and not do whatever. So
but there's a concession of something that can happen. And do you see
right,
how
and I won't concede as long as I'm in this mental spiral of, well, what's possible, what's not possible.
Exactly, because we're thinking about it in ways that are not possible to what's happening presently. The fact that we can ruminate about a future and a past and imagine what's impossible being possible is a great asset of our thinking, because it's where creativity and innovation and all technology has come from, and any positive human endeavor. And I'm not suggesting technology and all the innovation has been positive, because a lot of it has come with consequences that we have yet to come to terms with. Because we like the effect of the technology, we don't quite like the impact of its effect. And so we deny and we ignore, and we talk about nuclear power being really sustainable, when in fact we still haven't figured out how to even contain the waste on Earth. Nowhere they've put it has worked yet. They're getting better by burying it miles into Rocky Mountains, but that just means it's going to take longer for it to finally escape. So point being, our thinking really is still stuck in that same quandary, Les. And my sense is, because you're hitting right on the button, what's possible is what I can do right now. Because what's possible is everything that's happening. And if what I can do right now, I think I can't do because I'm in a quandary over what's impossible, then I basically short-circuited my ability to go to work and go to the gym. And so what do I find? A week goes past and I haven't been to the gym, and I'm brutalizing myself over it because I've been thinking about things that aren't happening as possible, when in fact the things that I could think about that I could do, I haven't been doing at all. So there's a good definition, and you're right on the button. Thought is an action. It's a primary action. There's nothing we ever do voluntarily, including go to work, go to the gym, have a relationship, get in our car, drive, nothing that doesn't start with a thought. Nothing.
What's interesting, though, is the same thought can prevent the possibility, can prevent the action, or the emotion that comes from a thought of, why have I done this, or why haven't I done that, or this may happen or that may not happen, often leads to the inaction, which then enhances or feeds the obsession.
You're describing a conflict. When I have the thought is the thought I'm having and it's bad, and I just say I'm having a bad thought, I'm feeling bad, I'm aligned now in my observation of what's happening. And so what's happening there's no hook in it. If I think the thought I'm having is a thought I shouldn't be happening, and now I have to wonder about all the things that could be happening but aren't happening, I am now launched again in this obsessive cycle of making believe thinking is going to solve a problem that I'm creating by not getting off my ass and going to work or the gym. So it's kind of like working out, climbing a mountain. Every climb of a mountain, no matter how big, starts with the first step. And every intervening step is critical to that climb. If any of those steps don't happen, you don't get to the top. And I'm not suggesting anyone should climb to the top of a mountain, but simply saying that if we're interested in actually doing, if we're interested in seeing thought as it is, which is happening now, which is a thought, the content of those thoughts we're choosing. And if the choice I'm making in those thoughts is having me oppose the thoughts I'm having, I'm creating a quandary to give me the impression that I'm in control of the universe because I'm doing what's impossible. I'm now a superhero. And look at the movies today and how many fascinating characters there are that are being developed for us to be fascinated by these superpowers. And it would pretty much mirror this idea that I can think about what's not happening, and pretty soon I'll make it happen, and I'm going to be the one, and all I'm doing is isolating myself, like MK was talking about in terms of his thinking, where all I get is better at imagining I'm going to be able to do something while I'm not actually doing what I can right now. That's a perfect example, Wes. And so what am I going to feel? Like an idiot. What am I going to be susceptible to? Anybody who thinks I'm an idiot. I'm going to feel shy. I'm going to feel embarrassed. I'm going to feel reluctant. I'm going to feel doubt, uncertainty. I'm going to walk around moping, pitiful, looking for an excuse, trying to hang pin the tail on another donkey. And it's super simple, so simple is that we've been doing it wrong long enough and make believe it's the only thing we can do. And I would say this has been a human dilemma from the beginning of written history. If you look at the stories, they all have victims. They all have people who were at odds with somebody else. They all led to wars and murder. And great empires that have fallen, empires bigger than any we have today that have fallen, completely disappeared, other than the remnants and the ruins that we visit in awe of this great thing that once was, not recognizing that we're repeating the same exact formula. We haven't talked about it honestly. We haven't talked about it collectively. And as long as we don't, we're going to keep acting in ways that are destructive. Exactly the opposite of what you described. You'd rather be as a realized human, beneficial to others, helpful, gainful in your approach, productive. If I can't and won't do the simplest things that are in front of me right now because I'm so busy thinking of all the great things I need to do to fulfill myself, the fulfillment is never coming. Because the vacancy is being created by the idea that my thoughts about what's happening right now isn't happening or shouldn't be happening. That is a vacant thought. It's one with no substance. It has no basis. And if the basis of my thinking is empty, I would probably feel empty and alone and disconnected, and all of those consequential feelings that happen. Thinking is an action, and it's often seen as something that it has a mind of its own. No, it doesn't have a mind of its own. The brain that I have is well within the grasp of my skull and skin and blood vessels and the interactive capacity of my body to sense what's happening. It's all in there. And my body has many more ways of knowing than simply what I think about what I feel. My sensory organs and all that stuff are happening constantly and aware of what's happening in my environment. And they're aware of the nuttiness that I'm doing in my thinking to give me the impression that something's wrong and feel wrong about it. The stress and all that stuff is evident. It's not a secret. So starting to see thinking as something we're doing begins to introduce the concept that we have a knowing, aware nature that we're always looking from, we're always present in, that we pretend we're not when we get consumed with the intoxication of our own thoughts. And we get onto that sort of vicious cycle of thinking about our thinking and thinking I have to get out of my thinking by thinking more about my thinking and what to do, and I'm going to solve it by having more or less of something and doing this or that with this person or that person or looking this way or that way or whatever it is. It's all just veneer, pretense, because I'm pretending that thinking is who I am and reduced everything that's possible to only what I think and wondering why I have dashed hopes, which would be pretty constant, and wonder why I'm always having negative thoughts that I need to constantly think I need positive thoughts to overcome. The negativity is a negation of what's happening. It's an attempt to pretend it's not happening because I'm not thinking about it or thinking differently about it than what's happening and thinking I can dominate it rather than see that I'm immediately setting off this inner conflict that is just intolerable and unmanageable and out of control because it literally has no control because there's nothing to control. It's complete imagination feeding on itself as though it's reality and truth. It isn't. It never will be. Can't be. Can I express reality and truth? Yes. But the beauty of it is, it doesn't take any thinking. I know when something's really dangerous, what to do. It doesn't require a lot of thought, repetitious thought. My brain just knows exactly what to do. It's designed to do that. It's interesting that these near-death experiences seem to expose us when we're unwilling to have those experiences where we are and realize that we're near death by creating the death of we're actually subjecting our body to the death, an early death, as a result of the stress we're ladening it with, and not see that we're doing it because we think we're doing everything to avoid it, when in fact the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train. So to your point, Les, what can we do about it here? Talk about it. And actually engage in a conversation about it, which I would suggest, rather than be an assured conversation, it would probably be one of exploration and adventure and inspiration, because it would be looking out beyond the limits of the thinking that we tend to rely on and protect and defend, and start to see, just like the mariners of old did when they started sailing the universe, you can't even get to the horizon, but everything that seemed to be hidden by it, as you move toward it, becomes revealed, simply by that action of that willingness of expanding and looking and seeing, and begin to see it's not even an expansion. It's just we're introducing thinking to doing what it hasn't been doing when we've been introducing it to ideas that aren't true. We've been subjecting it by choice to this quandary to make believe that somehow or another we are the creators of the universe, rather than see that whatever that creator is, or whatever that knowingness is, whatever that beingness is the nature of what we already have. It's who we are. It's by nature, everything. Inanimate objects know exactly what to do. They're being exactly what they are throughout the universe. Things we think don't think know exactly what to do. They don't argue. They don't fight. They don't struggle. They don't have depression. They don't have anxious breakdowns. They don't commit suicide. They continue to function. They transform their form in whatever way they're designed to transform that form. They just do what they're doing perfectly, flawlessly, have from the beginning. We struggle emotionally, mentally, anxiously, nervously, based on how we operate our machine. If a guy was flying an airplane and he was a co-pilot and knew how to fly, and the pilot didn't, he'd probably be anxious about the way that plane was being flown. Probably be nervous about the way that thing was going to operate. Probably be pretty assured that if they hadn't crashed, they will, and it's only a matter of time if there isn't an intercession in the process of that mistaken approach or application. So the basis of our thinking is we're not where we are. We're misapplying thinking to the idea that we need to get somewhere. With someone else, somewhere else, with some other time, and something else, somewhere else, with somewhere else. Never going to happen. It's either going to fall apart or it's never going to happen to begin with. We probably all had those experiences where we finally got what we wanted and realized it wasn't quite exactly what we thought it would be, and certainly didn't provide the nirvana that we were expecting. Morning, Philip.
Morning, Jack.
So what are the possibilities now between us?
Everything.
Yeah. And everything even includes, Les, to your point, thinking that what's impossible is possible. That's a choice. That's within the realm of possibility to think that what can't happen is happening, and what can't happen is the only thing happening, and what can't happen is the only thing that will happen. That's one of the possibilities. So if all the possibilities are possible, and one of them that we choose is the one that sends us on that hell-bent course, isn't it interesting we keep choosing that over and over again, thinking it's the only course, when everything else is possible? I mean, that if it doesn't sum up mental sickness, it certainly points to the nature of this repetitive reliance that has become what we think is second nature. And there is nothing second to nature. If nature is nature, it's our nature. And yet think of it as something that's intractable and difficult and a struggle and hard to let go of and all those things. And where are we thinking of those things? In the present. And what are we doing? Reaffirming that I can't let go. It has me. I'm a victim to this. I have nothing to do with it. I have not created it and I don't know how to uncreate it. When in fact, I'm doing it in the words I use in the present moment by making believe it ain't happening as it's happening, as I'm making those claims, as I'm having those thoughts. So if everything's possible, then we can do whatever we want. And if this absolute nature is absolute, that would suggest that we've always done exactly what we wanted, but we haven't noticed the underlying motives of those wants, as sometimes, often, if not always, being sick, being twisted, being bent on something that keeps them going in a circle and a circle and a circle and repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating and never seeming to end. Always beginning and never seeming to end. And that's a pretty good mimic of the present. It's a pretty good sort of egoistic concept of the present. The present is always new, and something that's always new doesn't end. So trying to take credit for reality and truth puts us at odds with reality and truth, rather than just recognizing reality and truth doesn't need to be credited to anyone or anything. It just is what it is, and we all share it. It's not something that's divisible. It's not something that's discriminate. It's not inequitable. It's absolute, and it's for us, as us, in us, with us, where we are always, whatever it is, without getting into the definition of truth and reality. It's just, I would suggest, true and real. Simple enough. There's a guy that a friend of mine introduced me to this week named Paul Hedderman, Hedderman on YouTube, that talks about his experience in sobriety. And he says, I was struck sober, never having been to an AA meeting. I got sobriety and then was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous to maintain it as a way of life. And his interpretation of the big book and his experience is very much aligned with what we talk about, but he's got some of his own very interesting ideas and thoughts and experiences, which may help in your contemplation and also in the expansive nature of seeing that this conversation is starting to evolve. He's been at it since 2019 or something. Thoughts, questions, comments, intercessions, desperations, defenses, reactions?
Jack, Gabe here. In chaos theory and the math stuff, one of the many definitions of chaos is that anything that can happen will happen. It's kind of related to your idea of all possibilities are possible. That what we are living in is chaos. What we are dealing with on an everyday is the unpredictable and the unpredictable things. Just one related example of that is for millions, hundreds of millions of years, the sun rose and fell in the same place for the dinosaurs, but then one day some big ball of something came down and landed on them. So it's one day that will happen or could happen, and it's not to be predicted or feared. It just happened. It's just one of those possibilities that actually one day did happen.
So in what you're saying too, Gabe, is that it is predictable that if things can happen, they will happen, and that the only thing that ever happens are things that can happen. And so the only thing that is happening is what can happen right now. And as we simply begin to align ourselves around that, there is predictability in that chaos by knowing that anything that can happen will happen. And it's probably not going to be limited by what I hope for or wish for or demand or insist or think should happen. It will be limited by what can happen, period. It's so simple and so easy that the adventure of our experience changes dramatically by beginning to realize that the limits I have on what I think should happen actually condemn me to very, very little possibility. So the condemnation isn't that I'm not getting what I want. The condemnation is that I know better than to think that all I should get is some narrow potential when the full potential is always possible. So those decisions I make about those things cause immediacy of knowing that something's wrong within my system. Because my system, like your system, like our systems, are built on a platform of knowing. Nature knows well enough to do what nature's doing. However it happened or evolved or was created, whatever the combination of things that led to where we are right now, we're certainly having an experience of things that are happening, occurring. So it sort of turns that a little bit in realizing there is predictability in chaos, and that is that anything that can happen it isn't chaos to chaos when it's just doing what it can to happen. Chaos isn't thinking, oh, what a mess, I need to get a handle on this. It's just the variability of all things that are possible, varying between where they're expressed in their possibilities. But their possibility is always possible. And that is a solid basis that we all share. And part of this shift is starting to see that we've always wanted what we were doing. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, we've always wanted it. We've just not always had the best foundation for determining what we want, because the thinking we were doing was sick in thinking we needed to have something to be somebody, rather than see that we are somebody in terms of having a body. We have a body. We're given a body. The body's our responsibility. The body is our spacesuit. It's our chance to interact in this realm that we witness with the senses that our body has. We wouldn't be witnessing what we see in the world if it weren't for the body we were seeing it with. We might be witnesses to knowing that world and this essence, but we wouldn't see the world the way we see it, because our eyes are designed to see forms and do not always see through forms and see the invisibility behind and the substance behind that. We're designed to see the projection of those forms. So we sort of see the superficial forms. We see the sum total of what that form is doing. We don't always see the neutrons and the electrons and the protons and all the minuscule stuff that seems to be tiny, but it isn't tiny within that universe. It's the wholeness of that thing happening that's happening. So beginning to align thinking allows things to happen we can't even imagine would happen. And in the big book, we talk about God doing for us what we can't do for ourselves. And it's starting to also witness that that power has always been that power, whatever that power is, however it's described, however it's thought of. If it's infinite and absolute and unlimited, omnipotent and all powerful, then it doesn't leave a lot of interpretation for me to have any power over it, but it allows me to begin to say, oh, I am designed to express that. My design is to actually allow that radiance to flow through me. And we talk about intelligence being brightness and radiance and enlightenment. And we talk about people who are blocked being dense, dim-witted. They're all words we use to talk about whether this light is coming through us and being conveyed or being resisted and creating shadows that are haunting to us.
Yeah, black holes there is black because we can't see it. You know,
well, it's just
only
the
human eyes are
light.
so ignorant to think that because you can't see it, it's not there.
Well, the irony too is that it's full of light.
Yes.
It's so massive that it can actually swallow light because it has a greater mass than light speed. It can actually capture light speed, so it swallows it. And yet it must be full of dark matter, like you had mentioned a month or two ago, is just where most of the matter they're realizing actually exists. And because we don't see it, they call it dark. And it may be where that ultimate radiance is. Because it doesn't have to be seen by eyes to be seen. And people in many experiences, these near-death and during-death experiences that people have that come back, see a very, very strong radiance while their eyes aren't functioning. Their eyes are closed. The one woman had her heart taken out of her chest and was watching the surgery from the room. And I think that was Life After Death or something like that on Netflix.
Yeah, I've also wondered with the latest James Webb stuff is that people are asking, how could there not be life out there? And I think human, ego is that there's other intelligent life looking for humans out there. Like it's so absurd that we think that, we should get a radio signal back in exactly the frequencies that we've been sending it out and exactly the messages that we've been trying to send out and receive at the same time. It's sort of ludicrous to think. Like, imagine 100 million years ago, an alien species coming by our planet going, well, there's just a bunch of, weird looking animals roaming this thing. Let's head out of here. Like they would have probably already come and gone for lack of life, lack of intelligent life. It's only like human hubris that thinks that it should be contacting us in a way we understand or should expect.
Yes. And it's limited to the concepts we have about who we think we are. The other thing that's interesting about it is that life itself would be the generative nature of all those galaxies and all those stars and all that radiance that's being promoted within the universe that's always been. Just because we finally seen it in pictures doesn't mean it's finally happening. It's been there the whole time. And there's much more than we can even imagine that's out there. If that photograph was a speck of sand at an arm's length, imagine how much more there is, to the degree that every one of those specks out there is another billion galaxies. And we sit here imagining somehow we're not part of it, and that isn't part of life, and that life has nothing to do with that, because those things we call inanimate objects, because they don't think for themselves, they simply act according to their design perfectly. Everything out there that's doing what it's doing is acting according to whatever the design is. If it's a design or an order, I don't know. Whatever it is, it's doing what it is. What it's doing, and all those galaxies are doing what galaxies do. Circulating, moving, swallowing light, doing whatever they do. They're just doing what they're doing. To consider that not part of life, that's a possibility of life. We're witnessing it. And we consider, because it doesn't breathe and think of itself, that there is nothing there, because we're looking for another source that thinks of itself like we think of ourselves. So we can't even imagine seeing them. If we were to see them, we would just. There's a story in Tulum. You know where Tulum is in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula. There's a big pyramid down there. And when the Indians originally saw the Spanish ships, apparently they'd never seen ships, so they didn't even see them on the ocean. They didn't even notice these guys were coming to land, and ended up completely taking over their civilization. But they didn't see them as a threat, because they didn't even notice the ships. It didn't even occur to them. They just figured they were clouds or something, because they'd never seen a ship. So the pomposity and arrogance and ideas we have about things only being what we think is, I would say, a good source of anxiety and depression, because if we know more than we think, and we act as though we only know what we think, it's probably an experience we're having that feels depressed and feels vacant and feels empty and would naturally feel those things. That's a confirmation of a greater sense of knowing, rather than a confirmation of some pitiful nature we need to escape and get away from, because we continue to create it by making believe it's not something we're doing, but something that's happening to us, not by us. So part of the conversation is saying, if I've wanted what I've had all along, why would I want such horrible things to experience? And I would say, to get my attention. Because I created a horror show, if I face the horror I created, it might be worthy of the attention I pay to it, to start to concede that it's something I made up, some pretense I created, some impression I created that's been depressing because I've maintained it so long. That accumulative weight on my body has been palpable over the time I've maintained it, over the new moments I've insisted it's the only thing happening. Rather than realize that everything was always happening while I was just imagining all that was happening was what I was thinking. And that seeming pulse and beat goes on to the degree that we don't simply concede what we're doing as we're doing it with each other openly, in a chance, an opportunity, possibility to begin to share that conversation with others, and have people see that if we share a common nature, talking about what we do in common, even if it's wrong, gives us a chance to open up around it and start to say, oh, I haven't been doing this alone all along. This isn't something that's unique to me at all. I'm not pitiful. I'm just thinking pitiful ideas and thoughts. And I'm nursing those pitiful ideas and thoughts, thinking somehow I'll resuscitate them when they're based on something that doesn't even exist. And to even consider that they're dead or could die would be to give them more credit for having lived than they actually do, because delusion is simply a thought that what I'm doing and thinking is all that's happening. It's just a thought. And thoughts as thoughts become a lot easier to let go of when you realize, oh, these are just thoughts. And whatever it is I'm doing now to have that thought is what I'm creating in terms of my experience. And if I feel like I got to get out of this moment, I'm not thinking about what's happening. I'm thinking about something that isn't happening. We never have escaped. We've always run into the arms of this welcome insanity perpetuating itself. We've never escaped, and we never can escape. And the difference between not being able to escape something that's absolute and finally putting to rest things that are not absolute, that are self-generated and delusional, is that there's no condemnation in what we can't escape from when it's absolute, because it gives us everything. It doesn't withhold anything. It doesn't keep anything to itself. It isn't spiteful, hateful, contemptful. It isn't condemning us to anything but having everything and being all that is and knowing all that is and knowing all that we can about all that we can know. Always. There's no shortage in that. There's no lack in that. There's no scarcity in that. That's abundance. And it's the thinking that causes the scarcity. It's the thinking that has allowed us not to feed humans on this planet while there's always been enough food. It's the thinking that's done that. It's the thinking that's had us make more and more food than ever and still not seem to get it to the mouths that are hungry. That's just a choice. And it's a reflection of us trying to get our own attention and concede that if we're operating that way on a massive scale, we're operating that way on an individual scale. And if there's anything each of us has individually, is the chance within our own body to begin to see things accurately and begin to concede things as they are and begin to look at things honestly. That seems to be the one lever that each of us has. If I'm unwilling to hear, I am only going to hear what I think somebody's saying and not hear anything they have to say at all. I'm going to shut that out to be sure that all that's happening is the world I think is happening. That's what denial did for me, does for me. It's something I can do. It isn't something that I am bound to. It isn't something that I must do. It isn't something that I have to do. It's something I choose to do. For the failings of thoughts I don't even think I'm having, for the failings of ideas I don't think I'm thinking. And to begin to concede that is to begin to actually recognize that the motivation for that isn't subconscious. How could we talk about it consciously as subconscious and not be conscious of it? This is another one of those things, Les, like looping around on the idea that we immediately start thinking of what's impossible to prove that possibility isn't possible, and then wonder why we don't do the simplest things, which is like get out of bed, make the bed, brush my teeth, go to the office. If I can't face the day, why am I thinking about the day and not what's happening? I'm thinking about the rest of the day before I start thinking about what I'm actually doing, which is right now laying in bed, wondering why I can't get up, because I'm weighted down by things that aren't happening through the resistance and persistence of my own insistence that I only focus on what's not happening and wonder why my day starts to feel like hell. It is a choice, and it's just a thought, and we're so used to it, or seem to be. I don't think we're used to it enough to actually continue doing it. I just think we use the fact that we've done it so long to justify continuing. It's like a bad investment. Sometimes it's easier to throw a little more money hoping you'll get it all back.
Well, that's where we take the thought of checkers, like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then we double down and turn it into chess and go, now I'm upset with myself because I know it's not right and I'm doing it. And because I'm upset now, I'm going to do even more or do something. You know, it just it feeds on itself.
Casinos rely on that. You know, if you could double down on every bet, you could always break even. Always. But the possibility of doubling, if you took a penny and multiplied it 30 times in a month, I think you end up with about $11 million. So you can't double down many hands before you give up everything you've got. There's not a lot of, if you lose the majority of the hands, you're going to be in deeper and deeper and deeper trouble. And that's the risk. And my sense is we sense it. We feel it. We're afraid of that. We keep doubling down. We keep thinking we're going to get it. We think we're going to straighten it out. We think someday, somehow the thinking's going to get us there, rather than just laugh at the fact that we're right now making believe that something that isn't happening is all that's happening. And what I need to do is get married to the idea a little stronger, a little harder, a little longer to figure it out and get to the bottom of it. And the bottom of it's a grave. Through stress and anxiety and undermining all of our healthy instincts and bodily functions, we end up causing the death we claim to be afraid of. And as I've said many times, I don't suspect we're afraid of death. I expect we're afraid of life. We're afraid of actually living the potential of our capacity for giving up this investment that we've made that will never pay off in any other way than the same corruption that we've witnessed too many times to even talk about and take seriously as something that will someday get better if we continue to think about it harder.
5,800,000 basically in 30 days.
If you add now all of the 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256 together on top of that, Anthony, you'll be at about 11 million. What you did is come to the total of the last day, and what I mentioned was the cumulative total of all the days.
Okay.
And ironically, the last day, I believe, is pretty close to the total of all the previous days.
You mentioned money and math, and now Anthony's off and running.
That's good. There's an exploration. We're already hunting. We're shipping. We're looking. We've got a cargo container full. We're searching for where to put that.
Jack, I wonder if you've heard this example or analogy. I've been watching a lot of nature things with my kids, both, from my kids' standpoint of learning and also just what's on the subject matter of sharks, baby tigers, all this kind of stuff. And that we're designed to repeat what is shown to us as as members of the animal kingdom. The baby lion is shown how to hunt. The baby shark is shown how to eat its own yolk and then go start swimming, and all these things we're sort of shown inherently in our DNA to repeat the things that are taught to us so that we can survive. And some of us in this discussion probably were taught some things in childhood that are just literally pure chaos and destruction and addiction. Do you think that's a scapegoat? That's a denial, that we're just repeating the traumas of our childhood because that's what we're designed to do. As a baby lion, I'm designed to attack that elk, and so when my dad hits my mom, when my dad drinks excessively, when my dad doesn't do anything, I'm trying to be my dad. Is that a scapegoat? Is that a ploy? Is that a denial?
Typically in the animal kingdom, the animals are being taught what they can do for survival's sake, and it aligns with survival. When we're thinking sick thoughts and then passing those sick thoughts off to kids, we're not operating on a basis of survival. We're operating on a basis of denial, and that denial is actually threatening our survival and sets off what we think are instincts, but every one of those instincts does exactly the opposite of what our actual instincts do. They create the threat rather than resolve the threat. So my sense is, I don't know enough about genetics, but I know that adaptation occurs through species, that as we go and develop, our bodies adjust to the environment that we're in, that we adapt to the food, the weather, all of those sorts of things. So I would imagine that the stress that has been passed on has also been inherited in the bodies that have been passed on through time, and that we are the sum total of all of those both defective, anxious disorders that have been suffered because our body hasn't been functioning healthy. It's been functioning on the basis of disease a long time. And my suspicion is it makes it a little easier to assimilate arguments that seem to make no sense because there's things in our body that are already operating on basis that don't make a lot of sense. They've been fighting off things that were self-induced rather than actual threats. Whereas most animals don't kill their kids to figure out how to teach them to hunt. It's like cannibals were never known to eat themselves. The one person they'd have probably been better eating, like the psychopath, serial killers never seem to kill themselves.
Yeah, but they're always, looking at some of those things on the streaming channels, some of them are really good. There's that mob guy who killed hundreds of people. I forget his name, but he sits down and talks, and he was severely beaten as a child by his father, and just severely abused, and he disassociates, right? So it's like you're sort of programmed as a young person to reenact or relive those things you were taught because that's your nature. Do you sort of agree? I'm not talking about the larger thing, but you're talking about is the assimilation and all of that. It's like
I suspect it's easier to rationalize doing those things when you have those experiences. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's, again, I wouldn't say that it's nature, because I suspect that he even knew that relieving himself of the conversation gave him relief to talk about it openly.
Yeah.
He also saw his sister get raped as a child.
Something like that. Yeah, just horrible stuff at the beginning.
But think of a society that has that happening today, women getting raped, literally women getting raped in countries and then being killed by their families because it's considered dishonoring them to have been raped, and yet the man who does it doesn't get punished. They tend to go free. We're doing that today. That's happening in our world today. And I'm not just talking about where there's honor killings. I'm talking about this country that has righteous killings of people for things that are just based on thoughts, conflicted thoughts. So if we've been doing it a long time and it seems normal, how normal is it really if insanity has been the basis of that normality? And are any of us worse off because we've inherited a tendency or a trait that we can either choose to make worse or begin to disband and allow the conversation to heal and create the balance our bodies are naturally designed. Our bodies are naturally designed to create homeostasis, which is balance. They're naturally constantly doing what they can to fend off things that would hurt us and save us with the things that were designed. Our nervous system is undermining that capacity because of the anxious disorders that we're suffering and preoccupying ourselves with in thoughts. The anxious disorders undermine our ability to have the body do what it can do and allow us to have the freedom from those things, rather than be quick to condemn ourselves thinking that these traits, because they're experiential, are all we can do. When in fact we talk about them in that way, we end up reinforcing them in the conversation. I'm not suggesting that they can't be obviously inherited by people who go through those experiences. But that if we as a general population are not going through those experiences right now and using them as an excuse to justify there is no other option, we're perpetuating the exact same conversation and making believe that it's just something that can't be undone.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, no, it's been done, and it's been done in sick ways for a long time. The question is it responsible for us to continue?
Yeah, I like the word trait there, because there's some definitely chaotic traits I inherited from my family, but there's also some hardworking traits, some focus traits. There's some things that have been passed on that are helpful and meaningful moving forward, so it's a good.
So think about
word.
the difference of those.
Yeah.
Think about getting back to Les and his action. If what we choose to do, we can do, we're witnessing ourselves usefully expressing our potential, right? We're getting out of bed, we're going to work, we're brushing our teeth, we're going to the gym. We're just doing it. If we're sitting in this quandary over what we should be doing, or I haven't been to the gym in 3 weeks and I'm such an idiot and I'm such an asshole and I can't, and why didn't I go? And now all of a sudden I'm up in my head thinking about something that isn't even happening and not doing what can happen in the present. I'm not working in alignment with what's happening. I'm starting to create an environment that isn't happening and making believe that the environment around me is a reflection of that, and it isn't. It's a lie. The environment is welcoming me to do anything I want with it. And what I've chosen to do is preoccupy what I'm thinking about. This is what New Year's resolutions are about. Why, after 12 months of deciding not to go to the gym, does January 1st all of a sudden make it possible for people to imagine? Because they made the resolution for the whole year not to go to the gym. Why is a resolution on a day now going to overcome that without looking at the fact that they've been in some sort of a quandary to give them the impression that going to the gym isn't something they want to do? Rather than
blaming it on somebody else. If so-and-so didn't need a ride to school, I would be able to go to the gym. It's so-and-so's fault.
It's built into our system to figure out how to justify. It's built in as an option to justify and rationalize what we're doing,
Yeah.
Make it seem better. But if we're feeling better about what we're doing that's worse, that's addiction. That's the trap of addiction right there. I feel better because I'm thinking about it in a new way, but the thing I'm thinking about is in the same wrong way that I originally thought of it, and I've just rewrapped it in some new concoction of thought and wondering why it wears off after a week or 2 or 3. Because I haven't looked at the essence of what I'm doing, because I haven't conceded the essence of who I am and who we are collectively. Not something I am alone as an I, something we are as any I we choose to express or think we are. Usefulness and application, if you can apply something and it works, it doesn't tend to need a lot of thinking to redo that. Going to that point you made, that we're good traits. Okay. Doesn't take a lot of thinking. You just say, oh, wow, if I get up, I can brush my teeth. If I lay in bed, I'm not going to brush my teeth. It doesn't matter how long I lay in bed and think about it. I'm not going to brush my teeth unless somebody brings me a sink of water and a basin and, does what they did in the old days where they just had a sink next to the bed. And then I'd have to use it anyhow. And if my thinking was I couldn't use it, I wasn't going to use it regardless. That's the denial is palpable in our experience. We know we're doing it because we feel uncertain and doubtful and have lots of questions about what's going on and seem to have great certainty and everyone else is wrong while we're ignoring the wrong we're doing in the lens we're seeing them with. It's a sickness, and it's only as sick as we allow it to continue. That's it. And the idea that we don't know what we're doing can't be true. If we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we obviously have some source of knowledge that compels us to operate in that same way over and over again. We act as though we're not doing it because we can act as though we're not doing it. It doesn't mean we're not doing what we're doing, because if it's happening and we're generating it, it must be what we're doing. Can't be anything else.
That's that source of knowing that I think I was trying to get to is, I don't know.
As though it's not here.
Yeah. I don't want to scapegoat it. I don't want to deny it. I don't want to sweep it under the rug, but I feel like the people I'm around weren't literally taught the things or shown the things I was. And so like, I want to use those thoughts and those reasons to excuse my actions. Of course, what you're saying, but it just sort of becomes a realization to me. I'm sitting.
You want to pass on those reasons now to your kids?
Yes. Yes. I do. I want to pass on those reasons.
So the
I
insanity.
have to stop myself sometimes with my kids going, Gabe, you're acting like so-and-so. Stop. You need to do this differently. Like you're, like it's just, you're boom, headed down that trait road again. You have to say, wait, this is.
I would say, Gabe, embrace it. Begin to live with it in a way you've never bothered to live with it, which is something you can do. Start to actually concede, no, this isn't something that I shouldn't be doing if I am doing it, because if I think I shouldn't be doing it, I'm going to think I'm not where I am, so I should be somewhere else.
Yeah, it's the same obsession. It's the same.
Yes, it sets it off. So the difference is, in terms of embracing, is open-armed. It's what consideration is. It's just saying, well, I don't know that I agree with what I'm hearing, but I haven't even bothered to consider it long enough to even understand what it is I'm hearing, because I'm immediately coming up against the thoughts I have that oppose it, right? And it's the same with embracing these experiences. As you begin to concede it, Anthony talked earlier about having a hurt in his foot, and then just start saying, that's interesting. I feel this hurt. Why do I feel this hurt? And then just saying, I just feel the hurt. Boom, and it started to go away.
No, the first thought of anything negative ended up in a glass of scotch, like, 10 a.m., 2 p.m., whatever it was. The first inclination of a wrong idea or a wrong thought just went down that road. And so
but it's the resistance to the idea that gets you hooked. And that's the same as this mention to you, is just to look and say, if you're doing it, allow yourself, if you've been doing it your whole life and think that it's a hereditary trait that goes back to the entirety of your genealogy, right?
Yeah.
And it's a choice you can make now to either engage with that or disengage with that. You can't disengage if you don't concede you're doing it, because you're going to think you can't let go of something you're not holding on to, and you won't let go of something you claim not to be holding on to. And the idea that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing is exactly this idea that starts from, I'm not where I belong. I'm not here now. I am no more than I think I am right here, right now. It's not true. So it sends us in all those directions of thinking we need to be somewhere else, with someone else, with something else, all those directions. And it isn't to say that we can't want to be with someone else, somewhere else, with something else. Those are all wants.
Yeah, but those are my ancestors, Jack, who saw those ships on the horizon.
I know, but you know where they track back to? My ancestors.
Yeah, that's true. Those are
every
mine.
one of all the genealogy. National Geographic did what they called the Genome Project, and they took 300,000 or 400,000 samples of DNA from around the world, and they tracked the variations of that DNA back to one source in Africa, North Africa. Meaning that wherever it all stemmed from, if it's been divisible by the bodies that are born, by the couples that have bodies, or however they're born, and it's created this population, if you track it back, it shrinks back to two people. And I'm not saying it was people, Adam and Eve, I don't know. But it was something that was sourced from a DNA structure that started at some point that could mathematically be reduced back to. And you know what they found, interestingly, talking about parents and being groomed by adults, is that the migration path that every I had some Asian in me, and some English in me, and some European in me. And every one of those was a slight variation of a path away from that place in Northern Africa. And the paths that they tended to follow coastal routes because there was food. And they tended to go up to the north, where mine were anyhow, went up across the Bering Strait when it wasn't water, and down the coast of North America into South America slowly. And the trade, it seemed to be like an 18-mile progress every generation. I forget what the number was. And what I realized is that this was kids trying to get the hell away from their parents. The whole migratory path was a slight getting away from the hunting grounds of the predecessors who had already mastered those grounds, and they were looking for fresh ground for themselves, and going on and on and on and on and on. And it took tens of thousands of years to get down to the tip of South America and La Paz and so forth. But if we've been relying on thinking as the source of solving thinking, we've been in a loop about thinking rather than seeing thinking as an option that we do. It's something we do. It's not something we are. When we begin to think thoughts are true and real, we begin to think who we are is what we think. And all of a sudden, all we do is think about ourselves because we think thinking more about ourselves fills ourselves up, but all we're thinking of is something that doesn't even exist except to what we think. So all we're thinking with are empty thoughts and wondering why we feel empty and disillusioned. Why would we be disillusioned if it wasn't an illusion? We speak about it openly in defective terms and don't see that the connotations that we're using are actually trying to ignore the point we're making. We talk about discontentedness. There's no content in what's discontent. If the substance of my thoughts are empty and I keep endorsing them with preoccupation of thinking, I'm making believe who I am is what I think. And that's crazy. Now, it isn't crazy if I want to do that as an adventure and a fantasy, and I want to be a great actor, and I want to convey personalities and characteristics. That isn't crazy. But if I was playing King Lear and refused to get off the stage and demanded that everyone in the building stay in the building because I was the king, I'd probably run into some problems. So the idea that we can turn it into reality and truth is the switching point between acting addictively in this never-ending quest to think of the journeys that have been taken on Earth. Everybody's got a path, seeking, journeys, paths. Everybody's going someplace. Where are they? Where they are, the whole time, every step they take. I used to tell my sponsees that if X marks the spot, it's tattooed on the bottom of your feet. And everywhere you go, it's exactly where you are. And if you run to get away from whatever you're getting away from, it's going to be right with you. Because the thought that you can get away is the idea that it's something you're not doing and it's somehow something you can get away from as though it's independent from the thinking you're doing about it. And what haunts us more, the greatest enemy, is our own choice to oppose what we're doing in our own thinking. That internal grind pits us against every person and everything in an attempt to make believe that they're all wrong and we'll figure out what's wrong with them. And we have perfect clarity in that while completely missing the fact that it's the wrong we're doing that gives us that impression. And an impression that lasts is depressing. We know it when we're experiencing it. And yet, talking about it openly, it's not very common, not very popular. We talk about getting sick when we have a running nose, but we seldom talk about being sick when we have running thoughts. We generally say, I'm fine, how are you? Everything's great. Yeah, what do you mean? Why do you ask? Do you see something I don't see? Well, if you do, please don't mention it. I want you to be my friend. Don't say anything about it. Friendships have been based on this corrosive idea that somehow if we just hang out with people that think as sickly as we do, we're better off, is a ship that ain't coming into port. It is a plane that's going to land, but it's not going to be a light landing. It's going to be a crash landing. So the exact thing we claim not to want to do is exactly what we end up with. And wonder why, as though we're bewildered while we're the cause and central character in that play. Silence and peace is ultimately that absolute sense of knowing. It's not in words. It's not in forms. It's in a sense of presence that we all know all the time. And if we didn't know that with clarity, we would not know what's wrong, because wrong would be part of the rest of all the chaos we're creating, and it would just blend in to something we could claim not to know. And to create chaos in our lives so that we can claim not to know what's wrong is a pretty sick venture, as it would be to claim that we have a disease and go to the doctor and say, I'm feeling fine. Don't check me any further. I don't want to know anymore. It's worth recognizing things that are wrong. We're designed to. It's how we navigate. Making corrections, noticing things that don't fit, noticing misapplications and something that doesn't work, and coming to terms with maybe it won't. Maybe the idea about having this work won't work. And maybe if I want to continue, it may work, but it may be frustrating to continue. And rather than debate it, just concede. Maybe humans can't fly. But what Wilbur and Orville did was just keep trying, because they saw birds fly. They had some idea that something was capable of flying in this universe, and that it was possible for us to do it too. And they kept trying. But the difference is, when it's impossible, no progress will be made except in thought. And when it's possible, little incremental bits will start to reveal themselves. And that's what happened for them. They shaved down a balsa wood or some kind of a wooden shape that they had in front of a fan that was on some kind of a slide. And as the shape got closer, it started to rise up when they would spin the fan. One would spin the fan and one would shave the thing off. So they would get little indications of progress. Because if it's possible, it means process of elimination means to eliminate processes that don't work, to get down to the one that does. And all science is about process of elimination. It's trying, failing, not repeating, trying, failing, not repeating, trying, failing, not repeating. Addiction is trying, failing, repeating, trying, failing, repeating, trying, failing, repeating, over and over and over again. Werner Erhard said that humans, if you put mouse in a environment with cheese at the end of one of 3 tunnels, and then you take the cheese away, eventually it'll start investigating the other tunnels. But if you do it with humans, they will starve to death going back to that one tunnel looking for it. And this is part of our history. War has been the answer. It's very odd that we would think killing other people en masse would be a solution to superiority. It seems so contrary to any good sense, and yet it's become this loyalistic, patriotic duty. And what do we say? Freedom comes at a cost. Well, if freedom comes at a cost, it ain't free. It's just twisted language subverting reality and truth in the name of attempting. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't defend against attacks. I'm not suggesting any of that. I'm just talking about it in terms that are absolute rather than these relative conveniences that we've developed to make it look like it's sane when in fact it's absolute insanity on full display. It seems absurd to consider that the world could be at peace. That's pretty sick. When in fact, the nature of existence is at perfect peace. The universe is not arguing with itself. If we're hoping we don't find life on Earth or outside of the planet, we may just be hoping we don't find more people like us, repeating the same kind of stupid mistakes and thinking someday they'll get better if we get more aggressive about it and more dominant about it and more insistent and more righteous and more indignant.
We'll just hate them too.
I think if they were there and intelligent, we would pretend like the I forget whether they were Incans or Mayans or whatever the people in Tulum were, we wouldn't even see them. We say, oh no, there's nothing there. Let's keep going. Next planet. We wouldn't even, it would be a shame. Just like when somebody says something honest and people are offended, and they're literally just sharing their experience, and people are offended by it. They're reactive to it. They don't want to hear it. You triggered me. You hurt me. There's no hurt and feelings that isn't there when they're hurt. Triggering someone's feelings is actually an opportunity for them to notice the limits of their own thinking and the imposition of those limits on their own experience of feeling. And so you can say thank you to somebody who's actually triggered you, or in reaction, fuck you. And that tends to be how it goes. And I have never been offended
That's
by
certainly
anything.
the two responses you elicit, Jack.
You mean on this during our talk?
Yeah.
I've never been offended by anyone who said something that I wasn't thinking was offensive. I was already offended by my own defense of something that I was offended by. That internal dialogue of that self I think I'm talking to is the world I'm interacting with when I'm obsessed with the self I think I am. Becomes the whole world and everyone in it. And yet I'm doing it to me in a way that I can't possibly blame on anyone else, because nobody's doing it 24/7 in my head as I do it. Ever. Never did, never will. And everyone I blamed were excuses to justify it ain't me, babe. Not me. I couldn't be doing this. That would be insane. Yes, exactly. Why would I do such a thing? Exactly. If it weren't for thoughts that were sick. And it doesn't mean I have any obligation to maintain them. It means that as I pretend that they're not happening, I'm going to maintain them because I'm going to think I'm managing them. I'm going to think all the things I'm doing to feel better about them is my goal in life. And all I'm going to do is deteriorate my experience and my everything I manifest in terms of it to mimic that. Ty and I talked about that a little this week. Manifesting. Isn't it interesting that people never come to me and say, I want to feel worse and I want to figure out how to have more negative thoughts. And nobody ever talks to me about wanting to manifest anything but great things. Nobody comes to me and says, I'm really manifesting a lot of shit. That is actually beginning to take credit for the capacity we have to make it up and make believe we have nothing to do with it. The embracing, Gabe, is the idea that we begin noticing that we're manifesting the whole thing for good reason, just as other people give us perspective. We're creating problems to give us the chance to look and see what we're unwilling to look and see in ourselves, in our own actions, in that thing we call ourself, that self we think we are. We're begging for perspective, begging for options to see it from, and then denying those options as problems to perpetuate it. That's insanity.
I'm one insane person.
Well, it's a possibility of our imagination to consider who we are as the thing doing that thing, when in fact we're just talking to ourself. Who is that self in there if we're not schizophrenic in some way and creating a whole image of something that doesn't even exist? It's like arguing with the mirror to take off the clothes we're wearing.
Yeah, I live with
I hate that
people.
outfit.
I live with 3 people, but talk to myself the most.
Oh, I have many more than that. Why limit it? There's a whole posse of voices. But starting to look at that and look at that inner conversation and notice that it's interesting that we would be talking to ourselves as though there's a self to talk to, is the idea that we are something other than who we are, in fact. Because if we are who we are, we wouldn't be talking to ourselves. We'd simply be talking. And if we were talking, we'd probably be talking to someone who was capable of listening rather than something with no ears. My image in a mirror doesn't have ears. It has an image of ears. It doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have a nose. It doesn't have a mouth. It doesn't have blood. It doesn't have air. It doesn't have lungs, organs, none of it. So to think about myself to myself is to think of a self that's wholly based in thought and is a reflection of the idea that there's something there to even talk to.
And to segue that, it's that sense of self, like which version of you are you thinking of? Because I'm
the latest.
Well, that doesn't mean that my thoughts aren't stemming from a childhood memory or what I thought of. And the reason I bring this up is because I had an experience. I was waiting. I went to go buy a car recently, and I was waiting for it to get delivered. And it was later at night, so the sun was already down, and I was staring out the window, and I had this anxious feeling of like, where is this car? Why is it not here yet? And I quickly remembered my childhood self when I used to be very anxious when my parents wouldn't come home late at night. I would just stare out the window. And I was like, whoa, I'm there right now. Like, that is weird. So the emotion that triggered me of like, why am I so anxious? It was from a past memory that it's affected me. I used to have a lot of trouble sleeping when I was younger because I just had this fear of my parents weren't going to come home. So I would stare out the window until they did, until I fell asleep. And I was standing out that window, current time, and that emotion came up. And I was like, oh, that memory, I have to be conscious of like, what am I thinking of and how is it coming up? And not understanding whether it's this version of me that, or an experience that had happened, but it's just no longer relevant right now. But it was wild that I had that emotion come up.
I would say though, it's only what you thought of that memory in the present that was affecting you.
Yeah.
And I think you're pointing to something I experienced when I first got sober, is that I realized I'd had the mental problem since I was 3. I mean, I could track back to being very, very young, struggling in my brain about what to do, how to deal with situations. When the thinking started, that desperation, that sense of, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to do the worst thing to do something to give me the impression that at least I'm doing something, right? I couldn't think it through because I didn't really have the mental capacity. But the other part of that too, MK, is starting to notice how long these lingering remembrances impact us, and we continue to maintain them and almost look for new experiences to give us a chance to simply say, oh, I've been doing this my whole life. This isn't new. It is new, but it's new for me to be thinking about it as something that's present rather than something that's old.
Mm-hmm.
The displacement is thinking it's from back there, and now I have to go back there and clean it up as though I need to change the circumstances, when all it is today is the culmination of everything I've ever thought of since then, right? So the feeling is the same because it's a feeling of disconnect. When you were thinking, I used to stand in the driveway and wait for my father. It seemed like whenever I stood there waiting, he never came home.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I'd come home, he'd arrive, or came inside, he'd arrive.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed endless to wait for
And
him.
realizing that if you were a better kid, they would have been home on time, right? Just kidding.
I don't know that I went that far in. I thought he would have done what I wanted if I'd have been a better kid. My focus was on how do I get what I want. But the point is that it's always present, that we're thinking about these things. And if we don't start conceding that the anxiety is starting to, I would suggest that one of your ideas was the car wasn't there when you thought it should be.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So that alone is the conflict of a thought with experience. Your experience is saying, here's what's happening, and you're thinking it shouldn't be happening. Now, it isn't a problem to think that you want the car to be there sooner until you think that thought is so true and real that you're relying on it for your present experience of when that car is being delivered, right? So it's a commitment to that, is rather than saying, oh, well, that's a thought. Okay, yeah, of course I'd rather it be sooner. I'd rather they ship it to the house and I'd be home right now eating dinner too. Maybe that, I'd rather all sorts of things. And yet we get glued to those things as being, that's me. That's just who I am. It isn't who we are, it's who we make up. It's what we're committed to making sure that everyone else understands, so we can begin to confirm the limits we've set for ourselves and think that everyone else is better off maintaining our limits for us. And now what are we? More limited. What is that? Less potential, less possibility. What is that? A lie. It isn't true. It's just a concoction of thought that we've used to maintain those feelings and sensations and give us the impression that something other than us is wrong. And it's the delivery of the car now that's doing it. You know, and it goes back to Gabe's thing about the considering that the things don't seem predictable, but what's predictable if they're not predictable is that anything can happen. And if I think all possibility can happen, it certainly takes my view off of all dreading only what I'm afraid might happen. Because now I realize, well, if the what I think might happen is one drop in the entire ocean, the chances of that drop being the only drop to fall on my head is pretty slim. I'm even using rationalization, but I'm using it in a direction that's actually possible and probable rather than one that's impossible and improbable. Those ideas thinking about what I'm thinking as being true and real are always impossible. Because I never feel condemned by possibility or intuition. I can have a sense that something's wrong, but I'm not the one that's wrong. I'm the one experiencing the sense to have the good sense to experience it rather than the one creating the sense that something's wrong because what I'm thinking is wrong. Follow me? Not that there's anywhere to follow, but. So just beginning, this is yoga of sorts. And what I learned by a woman who helped me to learn to stretch is never stretch beyond your limits. Just suggest a direction for your muscles and they will go that direction. If you insist and push past that, they'll resist naturally because they're trying to keep themselves from tearing and being hurt. So you just subtly go in that direction. The subtlety here is just considering the possibility to, if you can expand the limit, you'll see that it is completely arbitrary where that limit is set. If you can expand it, you can shrink it. And if you can begin to expand and contract and expand and contract and expand and contract, that's a decent exercise. I was listening to a woman that dealt with security. Her name, I'm forgetting her name. She wrote a book in, I think she's at Georgetown. She deals with security. And one of the processes she puts people is have them sit in a chair and have them imagine what's happening, and then have them imagine much more than what's happening. And then have them imagine much less than what's happening and much more than what's happening. And all of a sudden they have an awareness of what's happening that's really clear because they start to see that the limits they impose are literally arbitrary choices they're making in terms of their willingness to expand or contract. And if I can expand and contract, that means I'm expanding and contracting within something that has no expansiveness or contractiveness to allow that expansion and contraction to even occur. It's like trying to fill a balloon up in a champagne glass. It's not going to get very far. It's going to overflow the bounds of that at the peak, but it will be contained by the limit of that little narrow shaft rather than expand. The expansion is based on the unlimited expansion. For everything to be possible to constantly expand means that what it's expanding into is unlimited. And I would say that's a fairly good definition of the expansion of our universe. To make believe that the universe is unlimited when in fact it's expanding is to miss the fact that it's expanding into something that's unlimited. Why would it be continuing to expand? And I think it's expanding at 70 some miles a second. If I remember right, Gabe may know better. If it's expanding into something, there must be something there to expand into. And to think of it as nothing would give credit to nothing actually being something. And it's pretty much what they're starting to see within the dark matter. Physicists starting to see that most of the matter that exists is in the dark matter, and most of the matter we see is the least of the matter that exists. So what does that mean in thinking? When I think something matters, I think it's all that matters. When I believe it's true. And what does that become? A block. And what do blocks do? Create shadows. What are shadows? Haunting. Because they create darkness. Give me the impression something might be there in the dark that isn't there, but I can't prove it because I can't turn the light on. And when I turn the light on and it's not there, I just figure it's only there in the dark. So I continue to maintain the fear and the anxiety. If I can't see it, I don't know it. Fact is, we know everything. We don't have to see it to know it. Seeing is a form of understanding, not just visual seeing. If I understand things correctly and start applying principles, I start seeing things usefully and start confirming my actions by what's done in relation to them, because possibility starts to happen rather than impossibility constantly being my experience because I can't seem to accomplish anything. Even when I try. If I'm trying to do the thing I can't do, I'm not doing the thing I can do. And yet, I'm doing the thing I can't do as the thing I can do and not noticing. That's pretty good evidence if I just simply recognize stopping might be the best thing rather than continuing, thinking someday it'll work. I haven't walked through a wall yet. I'd like to. But I expect my nose would hurt a lot more than it does today if I continued to try. I tried enough as a kid when I wasn't paying attention. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Anyway, this is a contemplation. Next week, we're off for the week. So you have a little more time to contemplate and consider. And in the midst of finding the conflicts, finding the upsets, finding the anxiety, just take a breath and ask, is it possible that I'm just creating this? Is it possible right now that I could be at the center of this thing I'm experiencing? And witness the feelings as accurate assessments of the thoughts, because I would suggest they're simultaneous. Our senses give us raw data. Our thoughts think about that data and makes determinations about it. And if those determinations are wrong, we're probably going to feel wrong too, because our sensation is going to tell us we're on a path that's wrong. Something's not right in our system. Just like if a pump isn't working on a ship and it's taking on water, it's going to keep taking the water on as long as that thing tells it it's not taking water on. So there's a risk, and anyone who knows that risk is going to be aware of it, but people on deck are not going to be aware of it, and yet the risk exists. Doesn't matter if we don't think it's happening. And as you begin to see that you know more than what you think, you'll start seeing that you're much more aware of these things than you have thought you were, because you've been conveniently dismissing them within the context of thought as something not happening, so you could justify the denial and the ignorance being used to ignore the things that are happening. And desensitization for us is a sign of death. Non-responsiveness is a sign of death. Responsibility is a sign of life. That's the consideration here, is to act in responsible ways by being responsible as we're responsible within thought. If we're responsible for our experience and we align thought in responsible ways, we're going to see that the clarity of what we're doing becomes much more obvious, and the need to continue doing anything that makes no sense will become obviously not anything we need to continue doing. Just clear. Very simple. As you notice you're an observer, and you've always been an observer, you'll notice the clarity between this idea of getting into your thinking and thinking all you are is this circular thought of thought that you're having and thinking you are. Any parting thoughts or parting shots per se? Love you all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jack.
Jack.
Be well.
Guys.
I'm around during the week, even when we're off.
It
Thanks,
sure
Jack.
seems like a simple solution. It's just don't get caught up into thinking your thoughts.
Well, it's not don't. If you are, just do what you're doing. And if you begin to concede what you're doing is what you're doing, there's no conflict in that. If you begin to think you shouldn't be doing it, you're creating a new conflict. So just begin
Okay.
to just take a
That's
breath.
the
When
conflict. That's the conflict. There is no
Yeah.
conflict with it. It's just when I'm thinking about if I should be doing it or not. That's the conflict.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean, Anthony, that you shouldn't think you shouldn't be doing it. It
Right.
just means when you think you shouldn't be doing it, you're thinking
the
about
conflict.
something that's happening is something that shouldn't be happening. That would, if you look at it clearly, you'll start saying, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Or
it's happening, it's
for
happening.
me, I think what's helpful is dropping back to defining the term. So instead of going, oh, I don't feel right about something, I don't know what I should do, say, okay, what does this mean? It means I have two issues that are opposing each other and I'm not liking the outcome of them. It makes it so much more scientific and easier to get away from the emotional part between everything's so wrong and I've got to
Just
fix
remember,
this. It's like,
in an absolute state of being, there is no opposition. And if there is any opposition, you know what it is? If anything's
Me.
opposite in an absolute,
what?
it's absolute. So consider that in an absolute, in our world, opposite of good is bad. In an absolute realm that we are based in,
Yeah.
the opposite of it is the same, because there is no
Whoa.
opposite.
Now, have you said that before and I never heard that? I don't think so, buddy.
Oh, Anthony, you've been around for 2 years. Yes, 3 years.
That say that again, that if there's normally we think of as things in right and wrong terms, but if in the absolute terms, it's the same.
Yes, exactly.
So
So now let's apply that to right and wrong. Right is based on wrong, and wrong is based on right. And you know what the center point is?
Don't tell me.
You go ahead.
The absolute.
It's the absolute balance. It's remember the teeter-totter?
Yeah.
The one thing that doesn't teeter or totter is the center of the balance. It barely moves.
Right.
But in this case, that center is the neutrality. It is the point that's common ground between good and bad, right and wrong, up and down, in and out, all that. So the fact is they're all together. They're not apart. They're held by common ground. And the center point isn't an extreme position. Good and bad are extreme positions we take.
Yeah. Got it. So
Center
when you're on
point
this,
is contentedness.
so when you're on the merry-go-round in life, just try to be on the teeter-totter and be on that most stable spot.
No, the teeter-totter is already sitting on a perfectly stable spot to be teetering and tottering.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Be
Just
that.
recognize you're the one putting weight on one side or the other by taking positions that
Right.
are
That makes sense. What
So
do they
there's
call
no-
that in Europe?
there-
What did your friend say they called that over there? In Europe?
Seesaw.
Is that what they, yeah, seesaw. Seesaw. And that's so funny, right?
Yeah, it's like before. It's like present and past.
How funny is that? That's pretty funny.
Well, it's another. As you start looking, you'll start seeing the words that we're talking about are actually saying things we don't think they're saying, and we're actually.
But that's total
using them.
coincidence. It was never designed like that, right? I mean, no guy thought, hey, let's call this the future. This could be like the future.
To your dismissive mind, yes, that's a complete coincidence. To mine, it is not an accident.
Really? You really?
Not
think
at
so?
all. Not at all. We say things same way we talk about shit. We're accurately assessing a waste product in thought and claiming it's something we want to get more together.
What's
Think about
one thing that
We're
you
trying
wish
to manage it?
let's say with all this knowledge that you have now, 5 years later, 3 years later, whatever, what's one thing you wish you could go back and do differently with this knowledge now? That you could have changed, that would give you a different outcome. Like if you would have just applied this to your parents more, would you have
Nothing
had-
would have given me a different outcome, Anthony, because the outcome is right now, if everything that's happening is happening, it's the only outcome possible. Right
What
now.
if you were able to manage
Right
some
now,
business
right
relationship?
now,
That,
right now, before we go off into this masturbation that's not going to lead to any kids, it's not going to lead to any progeny, It's not going to lead to any new birth. You're welcome to do that. And you can entertain all those thoughts and think about it in those ways. But that addiction is exactly what keeps us in this stale mate of a stale relationship with a mate that isn't even a mate. It's a simple opposition to what we're doing as being a thought. And we think we can oppose our thoughts and we're going to get better by continuing to oppose them. And it doesn't work. Fight is not the source of life and love and harmony and absolute infinite source. There's no fight in it. There's no conflict.
And to wrap up, is it true that you're saying it's okay to have bad thoughts? Like, don't try to change your thinking at all. Just your thoughts are your thoughts. Just don't get stuck on them or think they're true and get hung up on them. But don't try to change your thoughts to be a positive thinking or look on the good side of everything. Just have whatever thoughts you have and don't take them seriously.
Well, let me ask you, Anthony, when you're having thoughts, what thoughts are you having?
It depends if it's lunchtime or not.
You're having the thoughts you're having, aren't you?
Yeah,
So does it matter to you whether you should or shouldn't be having them if you're having them?
definitely.
Really?
Yeah, as I want
No,
to be
but
thinking great
just-
thoughts. I'm trying to do great things. I want
know,
great.
but
I don't.
Think of the anxiety it's caused you trying to do that all this time.
Yeah, I get that part.
Okay, so what you're trying to do is exactly the opposite of what you're doing. That's addiction. It's constantly trying to get something that will
A
never
price
come.
must be paid. If you want to do great things, you got to pay a price. You got to have
Oh,
a little
really?
struggle.
Really?
You want to do great things and it's just going to happen. You don't have to struggle.
The difference is, are you struggling in sick thoughts that are giving you the impression you have to overcome them? Or are you actually struggling with something that you can refine into something
Yeah.
worth creating?
Okay. Yeah, that
That's
was
a
my
very big
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, that changes the game a little if you throw
The
that in.
struggle is just a challenge. It's like, you know what Da Vinci said about the statue of David?
It was there and he just let him escape.
Exactly. He knew it was there. He saw it in that stone. He saw exactly
He
what
set
it was.
free.
Right. What was that? A thought. Why was that thought invigorating to him? Because it was possible. How did he express it? In the possibility, because he had developed the ability to express it. You don't do that sitting around with your chin in your hand, wondering why your thinking is attacking you and how to blame everybody else for it. You do it by starting to his talent
Take
was
action.
developed. His talent was developed by interacting with what was happening and developing a talent in relation to stone that allowed him to sculpt at that level. It didn't
So are
just
you saying
happen.
take action instead of being depressed and negative and sitting at home? Take action. Just get moving, get your body going, get the blood
I'm
flowing.
saying that the depression is an action that you're taking. And until you begin to concede that you're taking the action that's depressing, you're
Yeah.
just going to launch another 1,000 ships thinking you're going to escape it while you'll be dragging it along like an anchor behind you and wondering why life seems difficult.
Or blaming it on somebody else.
Yeah. If you're doing what you're doing and thinking you're not doing what you're doing what you're doing while you're thinking you're not doing what you're doing. That is a choice. And it's probably not the most productive choice because now you've committed to trying to make believe that what's happening isn't happening and all that's happening is what you think is happening. And that's a problem.
So
That is
where
not
are you
going
on the
to
mental
allow-
obsession scale? Is there a mental obsession scale? And if there is, from 1 to 10, where do you fit in there?
1 to 10.
That's a good. That actually, somebody
Just
said.
remember the scale, Anthony, is sitting on solid ground. If a scale had no solid ground, it would never be able to work.
Yeah.
So the solid ground we're talking about is an absolute nature that doesn't change, it doesn't shift, it doesn't come and go. It isn't for some and not for others. It isn't because people are really sick and they're thinking that they don't have it.
It's not better if it's in Beverly Hills.
It just is what it is in ways that are not calculable to rational thought. And that's why intuition, by its definition, is knowledge beyond reason. It takes no reason to know. And if you begin to concede that and just consider it, you'll start noticing that you've always had a sense of knowing that you simply haven't thought you had, and you've been so committed to the thinking that you were pretty sure you didn't have. And that's a problem if it's undermining our capacity to express ourselves in ways that are fulfilling for everyone. And I would say humans have been pretty good at that. And the number of humans now on the planet are showing the weakness of that thinking because there's a little less room for mistakes to be made on that grand scale and have them appear to be not so bad as to be denied.
Do you like this quote? I was going to read this quote. It said, let July be July, and let August be August, and let yourself just be, even in the uncertainty. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to solve everything. And you can still find peace and grow in the wild of changing things.
What do you get from that, Anthony?
I like the part right here that says you don't have to fix everything. You don't have to solve everything, and you can still find peace and grow. So let yourself be yourself. It's just so simple. Instead of trying to manipulate.
Think of what it's saying, Anthony. And this is one of the things that's going on. We're told to let be what is.
Yeah.
Do you think it matters to what is, whether we let it be or not? Think about it. We're trying to take credit again for letting things be. They already are. The problem is not for anything other than what we see and then everyone else that we infect with the infection of our thinking, which means everyone is infected by that thinking if we choose to participate at that level. So if that thing that already is, doesn't need me to let go of it or to let it be.
Yeah.
But as I begin to see that it already is what it is, certainly relieves my thinking into thinking it has anything to do. Now it's possible, great things, because I'm not hamstrung in the preoccupation of thinking about what can't happen in place of thinking I need to overcome it to get somewhere. I can start just saying, wow, I could make anything happen.
Or here I am.
Because I'm conceding everything's already happening and it isn't even my concession. It's always been happening. And I've been a fucking loon thinking it wasn't. That's all. So it's just beginning to sit with that. It's going to force some disturbing consequences, typically, because you'll see things you've been doing that make so little sense, and to see them with clarity will
You'll
have
see
you
things
feel
you didn't see before.
Well, you knew them. You just didn't bother to think you knew them.
Yeah, you didn't see them.
This is about introducing what we absolutely know in absolute terms to our thinking, rather than introducing to thinking more thinking about our thinking. That's the difference.
Seeing is believing.
Well, if you need to see it to believe it, that means that everything you don't see is unbelievable. So I would say that's what the mariners thought when they thought the horizon was the edge of doom.
Yeah, you have a problem with that expression always, right? Seeing is believing. It's like, why do you have? Or I saw it and I didn't believe it. I didn't believe what I saw.
Yeah, people say you just saw something. They say that's unbelievable. I say, how can it be unbelievable? You just saw it. Love you guys.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, you guys.
Have a good day, everybody.
See you around.
Good day. Thanks, Jack.
Bye all.
Thanks, everyone. See you, everybody.
Jackie.
Thanks, Jack. That was a great